So now we're going into what we're wrapping up with, like pretty much our headliner for today. So as you might have seen, I put it in the website. You had gotten your Eventbrite list of being able to get your shopping list ready to be able to follow along with Fred Minnick. Now, if you don't know who Fred Minnick is, he is another member of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast team. He's also the managing editor of Bourbon Plus magazine. He is one of the co-founders of Bourbon and Beyond Music Festival, which unfortunately, of course, with COVID-19 has been canceled this year, but we're looking for a strong return in 2021. He also has his own podcast, The Fred Minnick Show. He's a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, bourbon curious. The list goes on. This guy knows his whiskey. So you are all in for a treat today. So hopefully you have gone ahead and you picked out all the bourbons that were on the shopping list, and you get a chance to follow along with a true bourbon master and a bourbon pro here, and really try to figure out exactly how to pull those distinct flavors out of here. So, Fred, can you hear me?
Yeah, brother. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. You ready to take it over?
Yeah, I really am. But, a big shout out to everybody who doesn't know. Kenny and I have been working on this for a couple of weeks, but really, Kenny has been the architect behind everything. So I know we got an active chat going out there, but just if you get a second, tell Kenny what this means to you today, because we are truly in a historic moment. And a big shout out to Rabbit Hole, for taking a risk and, giving us some love and sponsoring us. I want to start, Kenny, I don't think you and I have ever sat down and had High Gold together, but this is their new product. I was going to give it a quick little taste before we get to the segment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that should probably be the first thing we do when we can start doing gatherings of 10 or less people. We'll get together and share a pour of that.
I really miss sipping whiskey with you. I really do.
I just miss sipping whiskey with people. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
this is fun and all, but let's be honest. We all want to get back to seeing face to face for sure.
This has got that sweet oak note you like.
Oh, that's my crutch.
Got some smoke and some of that sweet oak note. So big thanks to Rabbit Hole. And Kenny, I'm ready to educate. I'm ready to teach some folks how to taste some whiskey. So let's do this.
All right, I'll let you take it.
All right. Hey everybody, my name is Fred Minnick, and as Kenny said, I've done a few things, but most importantly, I am not wearing pants today. So, Chad, you were right. I did come wearing a jacket, but no pants. And in fact, I was going to wear a green jacket. But you Google what happens with a green jacket and TV or YouTube, and it ain't a pretty sight afterward. I figured, you know what? I should probably change that jacket up. So I'm in my derby attire that I was going to wear this year, minus the green jacket. And I am so excited to taste with you today. Now, my goal here is for you all to understand and to develop your own palate. We all taste differently. We all think differently. We all want different things. And everything comes down to we are always in a different mood. We're in a different mindset. We all have different tasting memories. And so what I mean by that, go back to when you were a kid. What was the favorite thing that your grandma made or your grandpa made? For me, it was cornbread coming straight out of that oven. I could still smell that cornbread in my grandpa's house. And he would cut it and he put a little butter on there. And I would take a bite into that. I've tasted that same note 1,000 times over in various bourbons, from the likes of barrel bourbon to Booker's bourbon to even this Rabbit Hole I just tasted. My point is that what I taste is unique to me, and what you taste is unique to you. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Like, oh my goodness, that bourbon over there, it's better than that one. No. I am a critic. I'm a judge on various competitions. I give reviews. I say one thing is better than the other, but that's my opinion. It's always just my opinion. It's my hope that the way I express my opinion and the way that I show how I taste can help you taste and form your own opinion. So let's get to it. Let's start with the basic everyday standard pour of Maker's Mark. Now, here's the thing. Maker's Mark you can find this pretty much everywhere. And a lot of us will call it like the standard starter bourbon. But here's the thing. This bourbon is actually really special from a historic perspective, and it's also got a lot of really good tasting qualities to it. First of all, it is a wheated bourbon. So bourbon always has to be majority corn. And when you hear someone say it's a wheated bourbon, that means the secondary grain is wheat. Now, I won't get a whole lot into that, but you can definitely learn more about that in my books or follow someone like Breaking Bourbon or Bourboner or Bourbon Pursuit, and you're definitely going to get filled in on what all that stuff means. Now, here we are. I'm going to take you through how I analytically evaluate every glass of whiskey before I rate it or before I get into it. Now, I do not add water when I'm being analytical. I don't add ice. I assess it based on the exact way that they bottled it. So I look at it like this. The distiller put it in that bottle like that to sell. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking at that color. Okay, so that's a pretty light color. Now we know this is probably about a 4-year-old, maybe a little older than 4 years old. But that's a pretty light color. But the reason why the color is important because every single day it's in that barrel, it's working in and out of that wood. When it goes in that barrel, it's as clear as the water from your tap. So it's extracting all that color from the barrel. So the darker it is, chances are the older it is and higher the proof. So the first thing we do after that is I like to analyze the legs. Now, hey, who doesn't like a nice set of bourbon legs? What those are is you kind of see them dripping down there. Now, there is nothing here about the legs that you can assess and say, well, that's going to be a bad bourbon. What that does is that it gives me a footprint of this whiskey. So by looking at the legs, I kind of have an idea of like the oils that are left behind. You can see they're kind of like dripping down. I have an idea of like what the proof level is. And so the legs can be an indication of the distillery and their style of distillation proofs, because usually the higher you go up in distillation proof, the less, the less unique those legs will be. They'll just kind of be up and down. So we swirl them around. We look at those legs. And it's also kind of cool just to go back and forth and be like, oh, yes, that's whiskey. And now when you bring it to your nose, and you just take a whiff. Now, each nostril is going to smell very differently. Now, we're going through this process, and we're going to taste these very quickly. But when you do it, you smell it with your mouth open. By smelling with your mouth open, you are actually relaxing your olfactory. And if you're not accustomed to smelling whiskey, you will relax that. And if you're not accustomed to smelling whiskey, you might get a little offended by the amount of alcohol fumes. Whereas opening your mouth, you can actually pick up more than just the alcohol. So let's go in here and let's take a look at how to analyze it. So come in here. You're coming in full frontal, and then you go side to side. Okay. Now, a lot of people may be like, that looks like looks like you're being a snob or whatever. Look, this is all about trying to actually analyze the whiskey. It's about nothing more. The fact I wear an ascot, just throw that into the nobodycares.com. But the fact is, I'm doing it just like this, even if I'm wearing a hat. And this is how Chris Morris, Fred knows, this is how a lot of other great distillers and tasters knows their whiskey. So back and forth. Now, first of all, I notice that this is young. I smell corn and then I smell vanilla. Tell Kenny what you are tasting or what you are smelling in the comments section with Maker's Mark. Okay, so now after I've smelled it in my head, I have an idea of what I'm about to taste. So I'm going to put this on the palate. And when I put it on the palate, I'm not shooting it back. I'm just putting a little bit on my palate and letting it kind of walk itself back. All right. A lot of people will suggest a process called the Kentucky Chew, and that's a fantastic process. I just always feel very silly doing it. And that's when you go, you're basically pushing it all around. The whole process is to get the whiskey spread across your tongue so you can perhaps feel it upon every itch and see how it feels. Okay, so as I have nosed it, I'm going into the tasting, giving it kind of like in my head, this is a young whiskey. This is something that is not really exciting me. The nose is just kind of there. Okay, so here we go to the taste. A little bit on the tongue. Okay, it's got some sweetness to it. But what I first noticed after that kind of like rush of sweetness is the way it hits the tongue. So you need to. This is why glassware is so important. You heard Chad and Sarah talking about what they like. I love the Glencairn glass. To me, the Glencairn glass is the best whiskey glass because it does not hide the flaws of the whiskey. Other glasses will hide the flaws and they will come into your tongue at a very beady point, and so it will dodge some of your receptors on the side of your palate. The Glencairn will come into your palate with full volume, and it'll touch the sides of the palate and it'll reach all the way back. So that's one of the big reasons why I really, really love the Glencairns. It helps me better analyze the whiskeys. So after I have tasted it, after I have swallowed it, I am now tasting like the sweetness a little bit more on the front of my palate. I'm definitely defining that as to be like a definitely being vanilla. This is a very vanilla forward bourbon for me. And then I'm getting a lot of astringency. So we're talking like wood astringency. There's just like a little hint of tobacco there. And, it's woody. It's for a young bourbon. This tastes woody to me. And now after I've swallowed, I'm now looking for the finish. This is a very short finish. And you'll hear people throw around the term smooth. Well, listen, I ain't never judged a whiskey based on its being smooth. But I will tell you, the term smooth is basically a ubiquitous term that means, does it burn the hell out of you on the way down? So when you're tasting it, if it burns at any point on the way down to the hatchet, you're basically saying it's not smooth for you. So what is smooth for me as a grizzled whiskey drinker is definitely going to be different than for someone who's just starting out. So we'll go from that. I'm looking at this as I'm grading the nose as to being like average, the palate just to be a little bit above average, and then the finish to be below average. So if I were to break this down a little bit more, I'm probably looking at maybe a C plus or B minus, but probably more in that C plus range. Next up, we are going to go with the Buffalo Trace. Now, Buffalo Trace is a basic, traditional mash bill. So let's pour that. And if you can, go ahead and write your tasting notes in the chat section. I'd love to know what you are thinking about the things as we're going. What are you smelling? What are you tasting? What's the finish like? And this is very important. Remove as much marketing as you possibly can behind the bottles because you can't taste marketing. You can taste bullshit, which in whiskey is quite a bit, but you can't taste marketing. Well, sometimes bullshit and marketing kind of go hand in hand. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of like pumpkin spice, a lot of nutmeg in this Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace, I wish it was more widely available, but sadly it's not. But this is a great everyday bourbon. So a lot of spices here. And here I am, now that I have tasted one, I'm automatically comparing it to another. And if I'm in the middle of picking something on a flight, I start doing it. I start comparing this bottle to that bottle, and the nose of the Buffalo Trace is leaps and bounds more exciting and impactful to me than the Maker's Mark. We're going in on the palate. It's touching every inch of my tongue. I'm feeling it just kind of walk back. How's it hitting your tongue? That is so important to me. Always focus on where it starts on your tongue and where it goes from there. A lot of times you'll get a bourbon that hits in the middle of your tongue and walks itself forward. Sometimes it'll go all the way in the back. Sometimes you'll get one that'll hit your tongue and then cover it all the way like butter and just melt down your jawline. Some of my favorites are the ones that go down the jawline and they walk up the roof of your palate, tickle you the palate a little bit. And this one's not doing that, but it does have some of those qualities in that it comes in real slow and then slowly drips down a little bit. It's got some cinnamon. It's got some nutmeg. It's got definitely a caramel chew. But what I really like about this Buffalo Trace I'm tasting right now has a nice brininess to it, like almost like an oyster shell brininess. I really, really like that quality here. So now we're going to move to another product that's very similar to the Buffalo Trace, recipe. It's not too far off. They both use rye as a secondary grain. Their distillation, this one's going in the barrel, a little lower entry proof. Fun story about Wild Turkey 101. I've been in several blind competitions that Wild Turkey 101 did better than everything on this table. So Wild Turkey 101, you've heard it many times throughout this conference. It is without a doubt one of the greatest values in all of whiskey. Ooh, yeah. Coming on in with the turkey funk. Give it to me. So when I say the turkey funk, when I put my nose in there, I can start smelling it from right about here. Okay. So there is an aura, there's a whole bunch of beautiful, beautiful notes coming out of this glass that just whips the other two whiskeys that I just tasted. Like if I was tasting this blind, my mouth would be getting really, really wet. I'd be very, very excited about putting it upon my lips. Oh yeah, look, can you look at that? Can you smell that? What's it smelling like for you? Everybody got Wild Turkey at home? That smells like raw molasses and cinnamon. And there's a big old citrus note there. You put that all in a bowl, stir it up, and you got the turkey funk. Oh, yeah. So here's the deal about this one. It is tickling my palate. It is tickling it, giving it like a little tickle with pepper and cinnamon and like a spicy caramel, just a little bit all throughout the palate. Definitely one of those that starts at one point and moves backwards. So tell me, where is it hitting your palate? And now let's take a look. Let's take a look between these three whiskeys. I want you to write down or think about the favorite thing you ate as a child. Okay. Now let's go back to these three whiskeys and see if we can find it. For me, I'm going to be looking for, in this case, I'm going to be looking for Mama's cinnamon rolls. So I'm going to be looking for cinnamon rolls. You tell everybody what you are looking for, and you tell me which whiskey has that childhood memory for you. And I'm going to explain why I'm doing this and why I did it after three whiskeys. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to Maker's Mark first. Nope. Mama's cinnamon roll's not in there. It was a real nice cinnamon roll. She overdid the icing, and the icing would burn in the and so there'd be like a little crunch, and then the top would be overexposed with cinnamon. So you would have a disproportionate amount of cinnamon on some sides. It'd be real chewy in the middle, and the outsides would be burnt. I guess if you think about it, that's probably not the best way to make a cinnamon roll. If you're watching this, Mom, I still love your cinnamon rolls. Not as much as your Hello Dollies, though. All right. That's the Buffalo Trace. I did not find it there. Coming into the Wild Turkey. I found Mama's cinnamon roll on the Wild Turkey. What I did there. So I'm an Iraq veteran. And when I came home from Iraq, I was focused on healing myself from the war. And one of the methods that I practiced was called mindfulness. I would actually use that in tasting bourbon. And what I would do is when I'd find myself in a bad spot, I would chew on a potato chip or some kind of food, and I would think about everything that food did to my tongue. And when I started tasting bourbon, I noticed I was applying those same methods to bourbon and wine. And basically what you can do is you can train your palate. You can connect your palate to your brain by just like writing down write a whole notebook down of notes of things that you have tasted in your life that you absolutely loved and then go look for them in the whiskeys. I hope that exercise helped you find something in one of these whiskeys that you may not have known because you were looking for it. So now, as we have established that we were looking for something, we're going to go to Four Roses, which is probably the one whiskey that has most of my mama's cinnamon roll out of everything I've ever tasted. Now, Four Roses is an incredible distillery. They have 10 recipes, and they are a high rye bourbon distiller. And when you use a lot of rye, you tend to get a lot of spice. You tend to get baking spices in particular, not necessarily pepper spices, but baking spices, ranging from clove to cinnamon and nutmeg to cardamom and allspice. So here we go. Okay. Oddly, I am not getting the typical nose out of Four Roses that I normally get. Instead, what I'm getting is just a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit more vanilla. So I'm getting more vanilla out of this one. It's actually a fresh bottle of Four Roses small batch. I suppose it's always possible that a composite changed for this particular batch, or maybe it's one of those days where my nose isn't ready to detect that particular thing. Because see, when we're tasting, we're really, a lot of things can influence us. What we had for dinner, what we had for lunch, what kind of mood we're in, whether we got in a fight with our spouse, whether someone hid your wallet from you, which that happened. Oh boy, that is just lighting my tongue up. It's like that little dot board, the little lights, you played when you were a kid. Bing, 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 bing. I mean, it's just, my palate is being overloaded right now. And think about this. This is an incredible buy. I bought this, I think, for $20-25, and just a great value. That is really good. So I'm going to break that down best I can here. That cinnamon is there, but it's not my mama's cinnamon roll. It's more of like a cinnamon toothpick. And there's some vanilla. There's some like cake batter. There's some like fried pie crust. There's like an arrowroot batter. Like arrowroot's not a very common type, but it's what you find in like a lot of the organic stores. And like almond milk. Like this is a very milly type of bourbon for me. So now we are going to go to the Angel's Envy. And, I'm a little sad. You heard Kenny mention that, we had to cancel Bourbon and Beyond. This is my special Bourbon and Beyond Angel's Envy bottle. And I just want to open it up and tell my whole, DWP family we're thinking about you. And Angel's Envy is a good is a good friend to Bourbon and Beyond, one of the first companies to support it. And this style of bourbon is actually, as much as I love the Hendersons, it's controversial. You see, when you finish something in a barrel, it ceases to be bourbon. And so when they apply for a label permission through the federal government, they have to actually apply for it under the distilled spirit specialty term. And so that's why when you see these bottles, it says bourbon finished in a particular type of cask. I love the category. The whiskey is always very good, usually. And it's just unfortunate that the federal government has not caught up to the practices of American whiskey. I just always worry, too, that someone would take advantage of the system and say, like, well, we're finishing on pull-up barrels over here. And then they put a couple cases of port in the barrel while they're filling it up. I do believe Angel's Envy does it clean. They do it right. So that's why I always like putting their stuff in a tasting, because it gives me an opportunity to educate people and talk about that style. Now, what they do is they take bourbon and they finish it in port barrels. Now, I spent some time in Portugal. You're actually going to see a film coming out from me here pretty soon about my time in Portugal. And port is, I mean, some of that stuff is sitting in there for 40, 50, 80 years. I mean, port is a magnificent fortified wine that is absolutely tasty. And some would say it complements bourbon very well, but I don't think it always does. I think you have to do it just right. And so now what you need to do is you need to kind of erase your memory bank of everything that you have tasted before in the bourbon category and come into this with an open mind. You're not necessarily judging this based on it being a bourbon. You're judging it for being its own glass. And then, you know, however you assess it after that. But let's find out if you like the category, if you like this bourbon at all. So here we go. Okay, so I get a very, like, when I smell it, I'm immediately taken into a barn. And this happens sometimes. Sometimes you're smelling something and you go to a particular place. Don't be afraid to stay in that place and figure out what that smell is. Don't be afraid to say, well, you know what? That smells like the stinky ass gym socks that Jim Bob brought home from the YMCA 3 days ago. Fuck that. You know, so stay really connected to the whiskey. And when you smell it and it takes you somewhere, analyze where it takes you and see what exact flavor it or nose or aroma or whatever that is hitting you from that spot. Now here I am smelling a barn. Now I'm not smelling the part of the barn where you go in and there's horse shit. I'm smelling like the tack room. So if you've been around horses, they got a room called the tack room. It's where they keep all the really nice saddle leather and everything. It's what it smells like to me. And it's not saddle leather that I smell. It's specifically that whole tack room with their sweet feet in there. So it's a very, very unique smell. Okay. And then after that, some chocolate. I do smell some chocolate. And now we taste. Oh, yeah. That's a chocolate superhighway. Chocolate, 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 chocolate. And then some like almonds, a fig, like a plum pudding, apricots, a lot of fruits. Okay, so now that I've been down this road, I've tracked these flavors in my head, and I'm now going down that road of like, I want to pick my favorite. I know what my 3 favorites are. Okay, I know my 3 favorites from this flight are Angel's Envy, Four Roses, and Wild Turkey. Okay, so we can eliminate, for me in this tasting, the Makers and Buffalo Trace. And why am I doing that? I'm doing that based on how they felt on my palate and how long they stayed on my palate and what the other whiskeys did to my palate. So Wild Turkey hits it, and it's like kind of like going everywhere. Four Roses is like that little light meter, like ding, 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 ding. And then look, I like chocolate. I'm a rotund man. You give me chocolate any day of the week, and I'm going to eat it. And so when I taste that much chocolate in a bourbon, I'm going to get really excited. So Angel's Envy definitely did quite well, you know, from that perspective. So let's go back. Let's go back to our, that's the, so that's the, give myself a fresh pour of that. Going to get a refill of the Four Roses. All right, so Four Roses up against Wild Turkey. Four Roses wins that one. Now Four Roses up against the Angel's Envy. Well, I guess I should explain to why I chose the Four Roses over the Wild Turkey. When I tasted the Wild Turkey, let's say it hit 3/4 of my palate. The Four Roses hit 100% of my tongue. So the Four Roses hit every single inch of my tongue, whereas the Wild Turkey was about 3/4. The Wild Turkey did not really, which is weird. It hit more of the front of my tongue than it did the back. Normally, I get more back palate action. So, all right. So, Angel's Envy. Still that chocolate there. And now Four Roses. Now, I'm coming into this thinking that the Angel's Envy has a very good shot for me to pick this over the Four Roses because I have such a sweet tooth. And that's where like preferences of the taster will come in. So one way to eliminate preferences in your tasting process is to see how many points it hits on the tongue. And that's not preference. Like I do love chocolate. I like it more than I like just about anything. But if I am being, I would say biased because something is so chocolate forward, then I'm not being a very, objective taster. So what I like to do is I actually like to remove as much of the subjectivity as I possibly can. So what I'll do is I will analyze how many points it hits on the tongue and how long those big notes are there and what notes come in underneath. And this is what you can do at home as well. But really what you should do if you're following professional tasters, read the tasting notes. Just don't look at the score. I actually am probably going to start pulling away from scoring because it's very frustrating to me, putting all that effort into tasting something and all anyone sees is an 89 or a 92. And, they don't see the breakdown of the whiskey. So scoring to me is a crutch of the category in some ways. So here I come back to Four Roses. I'm really high on what I just tasted from Angel's Envy. So this is going to take a real full palate approach, a long finish, and it's going to take a lot for it to knock off Angel's Envy in this tasting. Yeah, that's it. So from this flight, I'm picking Four Roses small batch. Like I was saying at the very first time I tasted it, it hit the palate and it just went. And the finish is really pronounced. All these whiskeys are fantastic. And I hope that you all have something to take away, to learn, to how to taste. But remember, my opinion should not matter to you. No one's opinion should matter to you. You should just use us as tools to learn more about the whiskey for yourself. Take notes about what you taste. Think about the things you've tasted in your past. And every time you put something in your mouth, think about what that tastes like and process it and hear and keep it. So the next time you're tasting whiskey, you can pick up the oyster shell, or you can pick up that salted Pringle, or you can differentiate that salted Pringle from an oyster shell, or you can pick out like it's a Hershey bar versus just a light sweet or chocolate. So by doing those things, it's my hope that you can taste better at home. So thank you all so much for joining me in this historic moment, this very historic, this very iconic moment of whiskey history. As Kenny and everyone have said, I've written a lot of books. I wrote a book called Bourbon, the Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of American Whiskey. And basically, I do a lot of history. And this is a very important moment of American whiskey history. So thank you so much for joining us. Cheers. Kenny?
Cheers to that. Absolutely. I was like, I just finished one of my glasses right here with you. We had people all along that were tasting with you, as well as you probably saw the notes kind of fly up there. So it was awesome that people were able to kind of have this virtual bourbon tasting with you, because this is something that honestly not a lot of people get an opportunity to do. I mean, like, to be able to actually like talk to somebody like you and figure out how to pull those flavors out. I mean, this is something that usually people, they're just experimenting, they're just learning, and this is a great introduction and be able to do that. Now, there was a few questions that came up, and this is a loaded question. This comes from Mac, and he says, "What are a few of Fred's daily sippers?"
Boy, if I had $1 every time I got that question,
you'd have a good stack of dollars sitting there, wouldn't
I
you?
could retire. Yeah. You know what? I ain't gonna lie. They've all been mentioned in this show at one point or another. So you just have to go back and replay the whiskey from home, and they'll all be right there. Is that a cop-out answer, Kenny?
It's the best. I think this is the best political answer you could probably get.
I'll give you my legit. I'll give you my legit like go-tos at home. And you got to remember, my wife is a huge bourbon fan, huge bourbon drinker. So this is like, these are the family. These are my family. This is what we buy regularly. This is what we drink at home. Old Forester 1920. Old Forester Rye. The Wild Turkey. Any of the Wild Turkey products, basically. But there used to be a Russell's Reserve 6-year-old, a rye that I could get any day of the week, and can't get it as like I used to. I'm actually a really big fan of Peerless. I think Peerless is a really good bourbon to have when you're in that, or the rye, when you're in the mood for a real oily kind of over molasses rye. I like to get Peerless. I also drink a lot of rum at home. Let's see, Evan Williams, Bottle and Bond. I won my whiskey, everyday whiskey of the year last year. And then, yeah, that's probably a good roundup. And I know pretty much everything was on this.
And you're a huge fan of the Old Forester rye. I know you talk about that one all the time too.
All the time, yeah, love that one. Yeah, that was my second thing I said, actually.
Yeah, and so there's another big question from Kate. So you're stuck on a desert island. Mm-hmm. What's the one bourbon whiskey you're taking with you?
Well, I think I want to be able to. Here's the thing about desert. You get this question, and you're like, no one ever says like the size, right? No one ever says the size of the container that you got to take. But everyone always assumes it's like you're taking one bottle. One bottle ain't getting you through the time in the desert island. You know what I'm saying? So I'm taking a whole damn truck. That is just finished aging at either Heaven Hill or Buffalo Trace or Brown Foreman. But I'm hijacking an entire semi and getting that where it's at least. But I got to know it's at least six years old. I don't want 4-year-old or anything. I want a whole tanker of 6 to 15-year-old bourbon.
I feel like no. I feel like it's like a Fast and Furious thing that's going to happen. Like you've just got your cars like pulling up next to them, and you're sitting there hijacking those semis to take all the whiskey you want with you.
I mean, if that's what you got to do, you got to do it. It's for your livelihood, man. You got to survive.
For sure. And so, also I want to give people to know that if you want to know more about Fred Minnick and follow him, he's got his own channel on YouTube, Fred Minnick, where he's been doing a lot of blind tastings and interviewing a lot of people during this COVID-19 period. So you can go and you can check out what he's been doing as well as his live streams. He also has another podcast called The Fred Minnick Show. And he's also, of course, another critical member of the Bourbon Pursuit team. So thank you, Fred, for being a part of that. And I just want to give another opportunity to just kind of plug ourselves. So if you want to learn more about whiskey, the people behind it, the social aspects, everything like that, go and subscribe to Bourbon Pursuit wherever you get your podcast. Once again, as well, shout out to Rabbit Hole for sponsoring this, being a big supporter of Whiskey from Home. And we've been seeing everything that's been happening in the chat. Thank you so much for following along with us. There's been a lot of people saying, like, will there be another one? Tell you what, we're going to huddle next week and try to figure out, will there be a Whiskey from Home number 2? It's looking pretty good right now. I think we're very happy with it. And as Ed mentioned, we were 100% live today. So thank you for sticking with us through any technical details. And for everybody that was on the show today, from Dad's Drinking Bourbon, Blake from Bourboner, and Brian and Ryan and Suburbia, and It's Bourbon Night, you know, all these people, please go like, subscribe, follow, and make sure that you stick with their whiskey content, because it is something that, as you get into this world, you're going to find out that you actually end up loving it. And we all like bourbon, but at some point you begin to love it. And you get really stuck down and really starting to want to know all the aspects of it. And that's why you're here learning about how to taste whiskey like a pro with Fred Minnick.
You know, it's so true, Kenny. I remember I started covering bourbon in 2006. And at the time I was covering wine as, you know, on equal footing. And I was up for International Wine Writer Award in 2011, 2012. And I'm in this room with all these legendary wine writers. And all I could think of is, like, I just want to be with bourbon people. Like, I just want to be around bourbon people. There's something about this culture. There's something about the people. It's not about it. Yes, it is about this. But really, the reason why there are so many of us here, the reason why there are so many of us gathering at the Bourbon Festival, Kentucky Bourbon Festival, or Bourbon and Beyond, or Kentucky Bourbon Affair, or listening to Bourbon Pursuit, is because there's a culture here, and all of us are part of a community. And we're in this time right now where it's hard. It's hard. And people say, well, bourbon will get you through it. And that might be true, but I think it's the culture, it's the community. It's Ryan, it's Kenny, it's Rabbit Hole, Four Roses, Woodford Reserve. It's all these people. We all care about one another. Bourbon is its own community. It doesn't care about your politics. It doesn't care about how you were raised. We just want to sip whiskey and talk to each other.
I couldn't think of a better way to close this out. So I also want to say cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us. This has been a fantastic 5.5 hours for Whiskey from Home. Please be safe. I know somebody just asked, where's the after party? I know there's some things that Woodford Reserve's putting on. You can actually watch Neat, the documentary, on YouTube and Facebook today as well. That's starting a little bit later. So go ahead, Google that, go find it out. So there's a lot of good bourbon entertainment that you can still take up the rest of your day. But with that, I want to say cheers, everybody. Thank you so much. Make sure that you subscribe to everybody's social channels, and we'll see you all next time.
Cheers.